So the first session that I want to bring to you is understanding who Love Inc. is. This is something that God has been speaking and putting on me for years in my heart, working in my heart about what makes Love Inc. different. I believe this is probably the key to shaping your affiliate. For me, it's been the piece that has been confusing and I think somewhat missing. We can get so confused in why we do what we do and who really are we. Love Incs. Are too much trying to resemble other helping affiliates in their communities. We're different. We have defining differences, and I'm going to speak into those this morning and hopefully set the tone for the rest of the training of who is love in the name of Christ. We'll talk about our core values, our mission statement, our characteristics in the Love Inc. model, but then we're also going to spend time talking about people in need, the types of poverty, the emotions. The difference between charity and developmental compassion is critical in how you raise up your affiliate. We're going to talk about working with the church and the advantages of working with Love Inc. and the professional con artist that those who are operating affiliates have already ran into you, and those that are going to be new affiliates need to understand and know about. So let's talk about the mission statement of Love in the Name of Christ. The mission of Love in the Name of Christ is to mobilize the church to transform lives and communities in the name of Christ. I recently had an executive director say to me, does that imply to a church that they're incapable of mobilizing themselves? This is not about a particular church. This is about God's church. And there is not any particular church that is about mobilizing all of the Christian churches. That's what Love Inc.'s mission is about mobilizing God's church to transform lives and communities. It's about bringing the body of Christ together to do local mission work in their community. You must work with a variety of Christian churches. And it's not just a few volunteers. We're going to hear over and over again, Love Inc. is about the body of Christ, not a handful of people with a mission on their heart that they're trying to fulfill. It's about hundreds of people from God's churches coming together to fulfill the mission of mobilizing the church to transform lives and communities in the name of Christ. So what does transformation mean? Transformation means change. We are not just focused on something immediate that leaves people untouched. This is critical to understand because it must shape your affiliate. We must focus on the person. If there was one nugget to give you that will change your Love Inc. ministry 100%, it will be focusing on the person and not their expressed felt need. It is the defining difference because it frees you up to not meet their need immediately. It frees you up to sometimes not meet their expressed need. And I will go into this. It's not about the need. It's about the person and what is God doing to that person in that person's life. That's what we focus on for transformation. It's about not being satisfied with giving them something that leaves them in need. It's about being focused on giving them help that is a hand up and not a handout. And we will talk a lot more about that. We are much more concerned with the long-term results or ramifications of our helping than we are with instant gratification. Love Inc. is different. You must know your differences and you must be about them. You should not resemble other helping entities in your community. And way too many affiliates start to resemble everything else in their community. They're not standing out as being different. So our affiliate characteristics are we're Christian. We're not faith-based. We're not all faith-based. We're Christian-based. The Apostles' Creed helps determine that. That's who serves in your affiliate is Christians. That's important. We serve anyone, but who does the serving? You're not something you run an ad in the newspaper and draw your volunteers through the newspaper for volunteers. Your volunteers must come from your local Christian churches. You have a network of at least 6 different denominations. All of you here should have at least 6 different denominations. And sometimes that's challenging. You're in Nazarene country. You're in a Nazarene church. We have lots and lots of Nazarenes over here. The college and everything is headquartered here. So I work hard to have a lot of different faiths because I have a lot of Nazarenes. You must have a nonprofit and have a local board of directors. And there's a lot of board of director training because we believe you board of directors are extremely critical and important to the movement of Love Inc. You help churches organize volunteers to be available to serve. You must have a clearinghouse. There's a whole day of clearinghouse training. It's a critical, fundamental piece. You connect people in need. That's through the clearinghouse. That's where you connect up with them. No one gets served except through the clearinghouse first. With the people in the church that you've identified their gifts and their passions, and you're the bridge. You connect them. That's what Love Inc. does. You build relationships with your community agencies, other nonprofits, other giving entities. It's important you're very relational from God down. You depend on church involvement. If you don't have volunteers, you shouldn't be doing it. If the church doesn't buy into it, no matter how good the program is you're trying to sell, you need to quit trying to sell that one and do something the church wants to do. You're about mobilizing the church, not your own agenda. You increase the capacity for church to meet need by identifying where the gaps are, what's needed in your community, and then helping the church to reach into that need and fill it completely. You bring a very clear vision to your community and to the church of what it looks like when God's church works together. So I want to talk to you about the core values. First core value, we're Christian. Everything we think, say, and do is in the name of Christ. So if you're going to do His work, you must personally know the one in whose image you've been created. Having a personal relationship with your Lord and Savior is critical to being Christian. It's more than words and actions. Being Christian is much more than words and action. It's responding to Christ's love in us in outward, tangible ways that touches those that we work with, whether it's volunteers or clients. We must not be sealed up. We must allow ourselves to be broken by Christ, because if we're not broken, nothing of Him can come out. It's not being filled with ourselves, but filled with Christ. So we must allow ourselves to die to self to be about kingdom business. We must see the face of Christ in those we serve, in those we meet. We must see the face of Christ in those we meet. We must be the face of Christ to those we serve. And we must reflect the face of Christ to those who are watching. And believe me, your community's going to watch this amazing thing happen as the church works together. We have to narrow our focus to where we play to an audience of one. We play to God. Now, some of the things we're going to teach you, you will be pushed by churches, by ministerial associations, by people in your community to do something else. But you're about His work. You play to the audience of God. If you do not know who you are and whose you are, you can get in the way. You know, Love Inc. is all about us, and yet it's nothing about us. It's all about Christ. But if we're not able to be used by Him, then it becomes all about us. And then it becomes all about nothing. Prayer is integral. Prayer is an integral part of who we are. It's a necessary component. I believe the difference between a good work and God's work is prayer. It's the only difference. It's the defining difference. If you don't pray about it, you won't know if it's His work or not. Prayer is what opens the door to the Spirit moving in and through and providing. We can plant seeds, we can tend crops, we can do all this work, but if God's Spirit is not in it, it's God who gives the growth. It's got to be about Him. Impulsively giving people what they want does not mean it's Christ-like. Just because you can give them something doesn't mean it's right. God is intimately involved in every life, and our number one thing is to figure out what He's doing in that life and to join Him. God made this really, really clear to me when I came into Loving initially, and I was a clearinghouse coordinator, not an executive director. And I had a dream shortly after I started work, like 2 or 3 months in. I was standing before my Lord and Savior, and He said, "Lois, you have done much in my name, love in the name of Christ." And then there were 2 answers, and He woke me up before He gave me which one I would get, but He gave me them both. One was, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." And one was, "They were good things, but I wasn't about any of those things. Why didn't you ask me?" And I have never done the ministry the same. It's not about what I want to do. God's involved in their life. Every person you talk to, God's involved in your life. God is doing something in you. We must pray. God gives us everything we need. It's a promise. Everything we need to do His work and His will be provided. We must claim the promise, look for it with excited anticipation. When we're about His work, He provides a way. We follow Christ's example of valuing the poor and the needy. We must look at every person and see their value to God. When I look at you, I must see the value that God sees in you. I must ask Him to reveal it. Once we see each other as being extremely valuable, or anyone that we go to serve, then we become willing, and only then, to truly invest in them. And once we invest in them, there's opportunity for transformation. We must change how we look at people. Our motives have to be more important than the gift itself. So many of us are motivated because we have to do something. That's not good. We have to do God's thing, not something. God will reveal self-serving agendas if we just ask Him. We cannot appease our conscience more than please God. We can't do what's popular but not necessarily right. The will of the majority does not make it the will of God. And especially in this day and age. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it right. We can never let things be more important than the people we serve or the people who work with us. And this is critical. Thoughtless giving that does not promote any personal responsibility on the part of the person in need can reinforce their belief that they have less value. We have to start becoming aware of what happens when we look at the need and meet the need and leave the person in need. What it does to them internally. We must not reinforce their sense of worthlessness with indifference and complacency. We must not reinforce another's sense of worthlessness by treating them with indifference and complacency. We value the body of Christ. Everything that we do reflects on those around us. You know, we're really seeing that with the restart up of the Loving affiliate, or the reboot, or the national affiliate, whatever you want to call it. But we are the body of Christ. Losing the leader and now trying to reform everything has affected every single one of us. When churches work together, this is one of my favorite things about Loving. When churches work together, who gets the glory? Only God. It will be possibly some reasons why a few churches won't join in the work, because they like to be able to say, our church did this. And when they join with Love Inc., their church, along with a lot of other churches, did the work We're a tool that God can use. But in order to be an effective tool, we have to remain in His hand. So I like to think of this as an axe. When I was newly married, we lived out in, really the boonies. We lived way out in the boonies, and we chopped wood for our heat. And my husband was gone a lot, and I had little children. So we had a wood pile. And the axe in my hand, I could wield it, but it was heavy, and I was kind of clumsy. But I could chop it well enough to get the wood split to fit in my fireplace. In my child's hand, my 2-year-old's hand, he couldn't even pick it up. Even though the axe was an effective tool, it was not an effective tool in the hands of my 2-year-old. But when my husband came home, he could just pick that axe up and he could just chop that wood so easily. So the axe became a very powerful tool in his hand. You're God's tool. Whose hand are you in? The world's watching us to see if this impossible thing that has never happened, the church actually working together, coming out of the doors, is really going to do it. And what's it going to look like and what's it going to feel like? So Lavinka, I ask you, what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? They're watching. We value transformation in the lives of people and communities. People that live in chronic need often don't see themselves as having potential or worth much. And we need to become the mirror that reflects who they are in Christ, what their true potential is. We often have to be the one that believes in them more than they believe in themselves initially. Because the image they carry around is all broken and beaten up and devalued and worthless. We must become His mirror and help them find their identity in Christ. We must empower people to make a difference in their own need situation. Feeding without teaching creates dependency and fosters feelings of helplessness. When we feed and teach, we instill hopefulness as they take positive steps forward in changing and affecting change in their own life. Offering assistance without anything else keeps them in bondage and they become a prisoner. And this is what God has really brought visually to my mind as of last year. A lot of helping entities, what a lot of things have fallen into, is we are literally feeding, clothing, housing people in the prison of their need. They're in bondage there, and they can live there. And for many families, they're living there generations upon generations. And the only reason they can live there is because we enable them to. We sustain them. So if we do not do more, and you cannot just open the door. I have learned that you could actually open the door of their prison, their need. They won't come out. They're afraid because they can live in there. It is not a life they choose. It's not a life that's fulfilling, but they can live there. What if they walk out and they can't live there? So what do we have to do, church? We have to walk with them out the door, and we have to stay by them until they start to understand they have great potential. They will live outside the prison. But I hope God burns that in your vision too, where you quit sustaining people in need and feeling satisfied because you literally are the warden and they're your prisoner. We must do better. We must quit trying to spare people the pain of their choices. And again, God spoke to me in this. I'm a mother of 3 adult children. I have 12 grandchildren. As I raised my 3 children, I wanted them to learn and to grow and to become healthy people, healthy functioning adults. So I didn't tie their shoes, expecting to tie their shoes for the rest of their life. I took the time to teach them to read, to teach them to do all the things that they needed to do to be independent and healthy on their own. I certainly didn't give them what they wanted. They got a lot of no's. And when they made poor choices, I walked with them, but I didn't save them. They needed to learn from their choice. They needed to experience it or they'd make it again. Then I think about how God has loved me as His child. He certainly has not given me what I wanted. He gives me what I need. He is always teaching me. My life is a schoolroom. He is always teaching me to grow me into the full person that He created me to be. And He never saves me when I go against His will or His word. He only goes with me. He keeps loving me, but He goes with me. We have it figured out when it comes to our children and how God treated us. We have that example. So tell me, Love Inc., why are we so confused when it comes to people in need? We must give them what they want and not ask questions. Why are we willing to give them what they want and not teach them so they have to want again and again and again? And why, when they've made bad choices that are hurting them, that are keeping them from developing into full people, full-rounded people, do we save them? Who do we think we are? Their past does not need to confine them. We can give them hope for the present and help them redefine their future. We must never be satisfied sustaining someone in need without addressing something deeper. It is a defining difference. We value churches living out the two great commandments to love God and to love their neighbors. Love is the defining difference. How we love God first and how we love each other. Without it, we have nothing. Does not matter what we do. And if you truly love someone, you will not give them help that hurts them. Love Inc. volunteers come not to serve us, leaders, but to serve their God. You are not going to recruit volunteers to be about your agenda. You're going to be about mobilizing volunteers to fulfill the call that God has put upon their lives. They are not your instrument to do your work. You're their instrument to empower them to do their work. We got to turn it around, don't we? Do you know that reactive giving can totally ignore the person? Unconditional giving is not the same as unconditional love. They are not the same. So we need to quit acting like they're the same. We value building Christ-like relationships. We must be willing to go with them, not just to point the way. Transformation happens in relationships, not in possessions. There is never a thing that really transforms a person from the inside out. It can impact their life, but it will not transform them. And most of all, we are not here to save people. We're here to serve people with the love of Christ. We value the connectedness of the Love Inc. movement. We are connected. This room is full of God's people coming from all over for this training. And we can never do alone what we can do together. We can be a movement. If we get this down, if we get this figured out, we can be a movement. We should share each other's pain and rejoice in each other's joys. But I want to say a word of caution here. We are very connected. And if we're going to value one another, be very, very careful who you seek advice from and who you seek training from. Just because someone's very willing to offer you something doesn't mean that it will not cripple you in your community, that it is not diseased, that it will not work. And only you can be very aware of that and manage that yourself, because there's always people out there offering assistance. You must be very discerning. You must be very wise. You must not pick up diseases and let them affect you until you become ill and die. And it does happen. So just know we've opened up. National has opened up communication amongst you. That doesn't mean that everybody who wants to tell you how to do something is actually doing something that's healthy. So you must be very, very wise and very, very discerning in what you pick up and what you try to implement at your affiliate. And God will guide you in that. But those of you who are wanting to be teachers and trainers, there's a high degree of authority and level and accountability that comes with that. I never stand up here without a deep, I wouldn't say a fear, but there's a deep ache in my heart that I say nothing that will harm anyone the whole time I'm here. That everything that I do or say will truly help you become who God wants you to be. There's a huge responsibility, and I'm accountable for that to my Lord. So we are connected. Let's value each other enough that we're not hurting each other. Sometimes things we can do in our affiliates won't work elsewhere, and they're not a best practice that should be passed. Sometimes it works for our community. So just be very wise, be very, very discerning in that. And if you compromise your standards, you compromise the Loving movement. Every one of you that does something that is less than what these core values have laid out to be, you compromise the movement, not just you. It does affect the movement of Loving. We model excellence. We must be as concerned with the how as the what. And I hope that as you tour our facility, as you sit in these trainings, even down to the bags that were given you and the gifts that the volunteers made you in those bags, everything that we have tried to do for you is modeling excellence, treating you as valuable, important, and you should do that. We should never do good if we can do best. And we should never let a lot of good things keep us from doing the best thing. Don't be in a hurry to do everything. Figure out what is the one thing you should be doing and do it really, really well before you move on to the next thing. I think a lot of times we're in such a hurry to do the next thing and the next thing that we never do anything really well. So do what it is that is before you today, and don't be worried about those next things out there. They will come in time. But everything that you do, do with excellence. Do it with the very best that you can, knowing that the next steps will come. I think one of the greatest tools the enemy uses is to get us so disfocused in doing a whole lot of stuff that we don't do anything very well, and we really aren't a very big threat. You'll be a lot bigger impact in your community doing a few things really, really well than trying to do a whole bunch of stuff kind of well. And you're going to have to make choices. There is nothing ever given to you by Love Inc. that says you must meet every need that you hear. No. You must figure out who you are, where you're starting, and then you grow, and God will grow you. We value continuing maturing in our capacity to meet people's needs. We must find our true identity in Christ and become all that He has planned for us. We should never try to achieve a point where we're comfortable. If you think that Norma, Nancy, and I have reached a place where we feel like we've got a handle on our ministry, you are so wrong. We don't feel like we have a handle on it. We are continually being stretched by the Lord to do it better, to do something else. We're carrying a cross, and when you carry a cross, it's never going to feel right. It's never going to become comfortable. That isn't your goal. Your goal is to be usable and pliable to the Lord, to do the work that He has brought you to and equipped you for. And having said that, don't base how adequate you feel for this work on whether or not you can do it. This work is beyond us. And that keeps us in His hand. This is His work. You're right, you can't do it. But God could do it in you. If you get out of the way, if you clean out, if you become a tool that He can hold in His hand and He can use, God can do it through you. Watch your thoughts. They become your words. Watch your words. They become your actions. Watch your actions. They become your habits. Watch your habits. They become your character. And watch your character. It becomes your destiny. So let's talk about the Love Inc. model. There's 4 levels in the Love Inc. ministry, and we're going to go over all 4 of them. There's the Clearinghouse, Gap Ministry, Relational Ministry, and Comprehensive Development. So let's talk about the Clearinghouse very, very briefly. It's critical. It's your heartbeat. It's your foundation. If you take the heart out of your body, do you live? What does your heart do for you? Pumps the blood in, pumps the blood out. It provides all life. Nothing happens in you, right, without the blood flowing through you. Nothing should ever happen in your affiliate without it going through the Clearinghouse. You help no one if they have not went through the Clearinghouse. Everything comes in there. All ministry is then mobilized out from there. It's your heart. Is that a good visual so you can remember? If you're tempted to help someone and bypass your ministry, I want you, the Clearinghouse, you need to think, I just pulled the heart out of it. So it's organized compassion. And it's how you will hear the need, assess the need, and then resource the need out and mobilize the volunteers. It's foundational. Gap Ministries. A gap ministry meets an unmet need or a gap in the community. As you hear the calls from people in need, if they're all coming into the Clearinghouse, pretty soon you're going to know what can or cannot be met. You have somewhere to send them, or you have a ministry of your own and you identify the things you don't have anywhere to send them to and you don't have it going yourself. You could then mobilize the church to step in the gap. You could raise up a gap ministry to meet the need. That's where gap came from. Gap can be service, gap can be product. There are several distinctions in a gap ministry. Love Inc. identifies the need in the community. Love Inc. communicates with churches and agencies about the need and identifies parameters. The location and the facility needs are managed by Love Inc. All of the logistics, the paperwork, the volunteers, recruiting them, placing them, training them, keeping them, nurturing them, your hours of operation, how you're going to get the product in, all of that's managed by Love Inc. Clients, who gets referred to, who it serves, all of that is managed by Love Inc. The tracking, the statistics, the publicity, the promotions. Love Inc. oversees a gap ministry. It is not a church resource. There is a huge difference between a church who has a food bank that you refer people to and a church who has a food bank that is a Love Inc. gap ministry. The gap ministries all have these distinct features about them. Relational ministry is the opportunity to come around people. How are we going to quit sustaining people in need? We're going to enter into relationship with them. We're going to involve them in their need situation. Relational ministry is a term for when we enter into long-term relationships with people, when we start to work with them on a regular basis to effect change in their life for long-term. There's components in a relational ministry. It's long-term. They come week after week after week after week. You have relationship with them. There's accountability. There's defined boundaries. There's expectations. Very, very critical in a relational ministry that there's accountability. It's not just something they randomly attend. Relational ministry for Love Inc. always has incentives that help them reach their goals. It's incentive driven. It's important. There's the lesson application. Part of what relational ministry is about is teaching them concepts and then walking with them while they practice them over and over again until they become a habit. That's why the long term. They don't need months of teaching on a subject. but they need months of teaching and then applying that concept for months and months and months. That's why the long-term relationship. And they need measurable goals. They need to have steps that they're stepping through towards somewhere that they're headed. You know what they want to achieve at the beginning, and you're headed toward it all the way through. Those are some very important distinctions between relational ministry. Now, comprehensive community development is when you actually bring to the table the big topics in your community. In Nampa, Idaho, it's transportation. For some communities, it can be medical. Another one for me, and I actually have staged an audience on this one because it's a very, very big passion of mine, but it's the food stamp program. Do you all have a food stamp program where people are given a means to get supplement food? Well, the food stamp program in Idaho, especially with the economy change, is just the need for more and more food stamps is growing, and there's this big outcry about how there's not enough food stamps, and then there's the outcry from the people watching them spend their food stamps and saying, but they're buying bad stuff, and so they're wasting the food stamps, and there's just this uprising here locally. And I agree. We're giving out more food stamps. Lots of people getting the food stamps aren't using them very efficiently. So yes, they're both right. But what are we going to do about it? Quit giving it to them or yell at those that aren't spending them wisely? So I have audience, comprehensive development, with the state of Idaho's Health and Welfare Department and the food stamp program person, and I'm sitting at their table. And I'm saying, yes, they don't spend them right, but if we would teach them good nutrition and how to shop and how to cook, their food stamps could last for a month. And the church can do this. And what's really cool is they're listening. So we can affect change in a big way in our communities. So now we're going to take a moment and take a look at your first application there. I'm going to give you just a few minutes to work through this application, and then we're going to go on to the next section. So does everyone see application 1? I want you to take a moment, and I want you to answer these questions individually and alone. This is a personal application. So we, as Love in the Name of Christ, what we are to do is to help churches, help people in need, help the people that come to them. And in our conversations with our churches, we've been an affiliate now since 1999, they have struggled with how to help people in need, and they have also struggled with how to interact and work that with us. It's been a little bit confusing for them. We have told them to hand out a card and have them call Love Inc. But the reality is the church has felt very disconnected and very uninvolved in that. They haven't felt overly like they're serving because it's all just give them something, have them leave, and it's all done somewhere else. So we're working on ways to start that process differently and to work closer with our churches initially, but still be able to do our loving processes. Because they're struggling with what to do, how to do it, when to do it, how long to do it, all those questions. I think that churches work with 3 main categories. They have the walk-in client, the one they don't know, the one who comes off the street. They don't struggle as much with that one. They can struggle with them, but not as much. But boy, do they struggle with their church member. In fact, they feel very obligated to meet the need of their church members, and they're struggling in that because often it is not alleviating their need, it is feeding their need. And then there's the relative or the friend of the church member that someone knows about. Churches really struggle with this particular population. They don't know them, but the church member for the last 50 years is adamant that the church should help them help them. So when we talk about how to help churches, help people, help the poor, we're kind of working with those 3 categories, which the churches work with a lot. So we want to educate, equip, empower, coordinate, mobilize, and communicate back to the church. That's what we as Love Inc. should strive to do. So I need to help you understand poverty with what little I know. I'm going to pass to you what I know. Hopefully you'll know more. But we need to go to our churches and train them. We need to help our churches help people in need. And the best way they're going to work more with you, Love Inc., is for you to take time to educate them. So there's three main types of poverty. Situational poverty is what is all over the economy right now. It's people who have lost their jobs. It's when a medical crisis comes into the home, takes all of their money, changes their whole lifestyle. Situational poverty is normally first generational. They've entered into it in their generation. It's usually unexpected, usually unavoidable, and normally the person in situational poverty is doing everything they can to get out of it. They don't live there, they don't want to be there, and they want out of it. Often people in situational poverty become paralyzed in how to find resources to help them because they've not been there before. Now, relational poverty, well, generational, let me talk about generational poverty first. Generational poverty is what we all know exists in our communities. Generational poverty is more than first generation. It's second, third, sometimes even fourth now. Generational poverty is a lifestyle. That's one of the critical things we need to understand. Children have learned how to live in need from their parents who have modeled the behavior. The drive to leave generational poverty is not there. While there can be a lot of negative emotions, one of them is not normally to get out of this situation. There are some that feel that way, but the majority of people that have lived in generational poverty have never seen anything else, and it is the lifestyle that they were modeled and mentored. That's how they live. When we address people that are living in generational poverty, we have to start there. Quite often we just look at them and say, why aren't you living differently? Why aren't you making other choices? Okay, where would they have seen those other choices? We have to think of it differently. Now, relational poverty is when your relationships have all been worn out, broken down, or non-existent, and you have no one to turn to. If I have a crisis of any sort, I have a strong network of people around me. I am not relationally poor. But there are people who have no one around them to help them, and they truly are alone, sometimes due to abuse of their relationships, but for whatever reason, they're relationally poor. Now, think a few important things to understand that the poor is often portrayed as homeless and hungry. If you think of people, if you close your eyes and think of people that are living in the street or living on need, what do you think of? That they are on the street, that they are ragged, that they're, that's what we think of, right? Normally that's what comes to mind. The person on the street corner with a sign, the ragged child with mother in ragged clothes, huddled in a corner in an alley. But honestly, people, how many of you personally in your community in America have watched someone die of starvation? I haven't, not in America. It's called food insecurity, actually. They may not know when their next meal is coming or where it's coming from, but they will be fed. So we do not have the hungry like they would in a third world country here in our country. I think that it's important to understand that technically government, when it speaks homeless, it's speaking of anyone displaced from their original home. So the homeless rates have risen dramatically with lots of foreclosures, people losing their homes. They're now living in other places or with family, temporary type situations, not their homes. They're counted as homeless. So when you see these high numbers, it's not people literally on the street homeless. It includes people living in other homes, living in a different living situation than they're used to. That's critical to understand. The homeless population number is growing, but it's really displaced people from their home. Homelessness for most people is temporary, often unexpected. But if we move into the chronically homeless person, we must understand that they face huge additional issues. First of all, if they're truly living on the street without anything, they're not employable. They don't have a means to get clean. They often don't have a telephone. They don't have anything that would make them employable. Often they have mental illness set in. Most people that live on the street always have mental illness set in due to a ramification of the condition of living on the street. And often they develop addictions. This homeless person, this chronically homeless, mentally ill, addicted person, your church as a whole is not going to serve them real effectively. It takes people with training and expertise to get people off of an addiction, to work with the mentally ill. It's not safe for church people to take homeless people into their homes. That population, that homeless population that most of us think about when we think of helping people in need, is not who your churches will most effectively serve. So let's talk about poverty and resources. Poverty is the extent that a person is lacking in resources. And resources come in a variety of categories: financial, emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, support systems, relationships, the role models, integrity, their motivations. All of those things are resources. So the less resources a person has, the more in poverty they tend to live. You could have someone who has very little money, so they financially are poor. But they have strong spiritual, emotional, mental, family relationships, role models. They are not living in need. They just don't have a lot of money. Now, you could have someone with a lot of money that is spiritually, relationally, emotionally, physically poor, and they live in need. So when Loving talks about helping people in need, it is not just whether or not they're on the street homeless with no money. We're talking about anyone that lacks resources to a high degree. In our New Hope Relational Program, we have 6-figure income families come in with great need in all the other resources of their lives, and they enter into our programs. So we need to understand it's not just about whether or not they have the money that makes them in need. Who does a church most effectively help? The church most effectively helps the working poor. If you were to come to our New Hope Relational Program, you would not be able to identify who is the client and who is the volunteer. We all look kind of the same. Most of the time they go to school where we go, shop, go to church, work, play. Our lives are integrated to some, but there's need. That's who the church most effectively can serve and enter into relationship with and see transformation with. And this is a population that is largely being overlooked by other helping entities. They're really focusing on the drug addict, the prison parolee, the mentally ill, the elderly, the domestic violence. There's not a lot of people that are focused on the working poor. People that have need in their home, that are struggling, that are somewhat functioning, sometimes pretty highly functioning. The church is the ideal resource to address this need. So one of the things we have to learn is the mentality of people who live in need all the time versus the mentality of other people. So Ruby Payne, if you've ever read Ruby Payne's book, I took one page out of it to just show you some of the differences, because when you start to understand people think differently, then they behave differently. We start to have a different reaction to what they do, correct? Money for people in need. People who don't have money don't value money, and the minute they get it, they spend it. Money is to be spent. And entertainment is high on the list of someone who lives in chronic need of things. So they often spend their money on entertainment, which is why you can take food to someone and have a huge big screen TV in their home. They've spent their money and they bought it for their entertainment because they value both. Now, I'm middle class. Money for me is to be managed. I try to use my money wisely. Wealthy people tend to invest their money. They pass it from generation to generation, and they're always investing it. Food. People that live in chronic need, it's just enough. Do they have enough? Will they be hungry after they've eaten? For me, it is all about the taste. Am I going to like it? I'm not hungry enough, as you can see, I'm not hungry enough to eat anything that doesn't taste good. Now for the wealthy, it really is about the little piece of meat with the drizzles under it and on it and the flowers that are edible on top of it. It's all about presentation. People who live in chronic need, they live in the moment. Again, they don't plan. They don't know what the next moment is. They don't have anything to plan for, so they live in the present. I live in the future. I'm always thinking ahead. I'm thinking ahead of when I retire. I'm thinking of when my children's children and all of these things. I am planning for my future as well as living in the present. And then the wealthy, they've got their traditions, their history that they're passing through their bloodline. Those things are important to them. So people that live in chronic need don't think like you and I do. And we need to understand how they think. So what are some of the challenges when we address need? First, there's insufficient resources to meet the need before us. Would you all agree there's more need in your community than there's resources? Everybody say amen to that? Amen. Amen to that, yeah. And as the need grows, so does the need for more resources. I believe that there is a huge deficit in knowledge of how to best address need. I believe that until we start changing how we address need, need will never change. That is why the defining difference and living the defining difference out is so critical, because we will change how we address need. And need will change as we change how we address it. There's this dependency between the person who has and the person who needs. There's this burned out, left out relationship in a lot of giving scenarios right now. The giver becomes burned out because they have to keep giving to the recipient because nothing's changing in their life, so that need never goes away. Food given today is going to need to be given tomorrow, and on and on. So the giver starts to feel very burned out. But the recipient, they feel left out. They're not a part of this at all. They just have to ask and ask and ask and ask. They feel devalued, they feel worthless, they feel all these emotions. This very unhealthy relationship exists between the giver and the recipient. This sustaining people in need grows. So let's talk about the difference between a hand up and a hand out. We all say it. Our communities all say it. If you all said, I want to give a hand up, not a hand out. Everybody in here believe in that? But I don't know that we've really thought about it. God showed me last year. He was showing me, and whenever I say that, people, it's not that God and I just sit and have these verbal conversations, okay? I don't want to lead anybody down a path. But I just feel moved and impacted by things that actually change what I do, and I want to give all credit and glory to Him in that, okay? So when I say something like that, I'm just saying that I believe God will feed and move any of us that are open to hearing from Him. But a handout. You can give a handout and never see the person you help. You can give a handout over and over again and never come in touch with them or have anything to do with them. We all engage in handouts. But if Kathy here falls down and Kathy calls to me and says, Lois, help me up. If I want to give her a hand up, I'm going to come close to Kathy. And I'm going to have to extend my hand. And she's going to have to touch me, and I'm going to touch her, and I'll actually see the color of her eyes. We're going to get that close. And when I lift her, I'm going to feel her burden. We're going to physically, emotionally connect as I help her up. You cannot do a hand up without connecting personally. You can give a handout and never see them. I believe people in need feel trapped. They live in bondage. They're chained to their need situation. So I want to spend a minute and talk about the emotions of living in need, because this is critical to how we address need. Because when these start burning inside of you, you change how you address their need, because you do not want to further feed into these emotions. So I want you to read them with me out loud. A person in need can feel hopeless, worthless, embarrassed, insignificant, unimportant, powerless, incompetent, dependent, defeated, helpless, angry, entitled, rejected, unloved, humiliated, imprisoned, and lost. And the people that I interview every person that comes into our relational program, and almost across the board, they feel these things. If not every one of them, most of them. But have you ever thought that how we address need either further enhances these emotions or starts to change them? And a handout does nothing but continue to make them feel helpless and hopeless, unworthy, entitled, unimportant. How we help determines how they see themselves. Can we afford to continue to say yes and feed into this when we can do more? We must make a difference in their lives. We must help them see their identity in Christ. We must be the mirror that starts to show them they have capabilities and abilities to make a difference in their own need situation. And we must quit listening to their lies because we don't want to confront truth. When someone tells you a falseness, they know that you know that they just lied. And when you don't address it and you accept the lie, what you say to them, although you don't say it, but I don't value you enough to speak truth into you. We have to start speaking the truth in love because they're that valuable. Church, we aren't like everyone else. We can't accept a lie that speaks less of them than they are. And I do say that to people. Say, I am not going to buy that. I know God has given you more potential than that. And I am unwilling to participate in anything that holds you captive when you could do more. Speak truth into people you help. Don't let them tell you a lie and embrace it by turning away. Turning away, not having time, just allows them to continue down this path of emotions. So let's talk about traditional charity compassion. So first we need to understand reactive giving and responsive giving. Reactive giving is most of the time a handout. It's driven by emotions. It displays sympathy. It's this, I have to do something, and I have to do it now. I cannot let them leave without doing something. I must save them. I must give them something. That's reactive giving. Haven't we all played into that? They've asked for something. How can we not do something? Now, responsive giving is more empathetic along with sympathy. But it's, I must do the right thing. I can't just do anything. For me, it's because I don't want to hear, Lois, I wasn't doing that. Lois, I wasn't doing that. I don't want to hear that. And God has shown me personally, just like He will show you personally, I believe 100% that I will have those two answers in front of me when I stand before my Lord and Savior. I do not think that was a random dream. And it does drive everything I do. Now, He may give you something different that will make you shake and quake on that day that comes before you. but I will not have him say, you didn't ask me, I wasn't doing it. So responsive giving is, I must do what God wants me to do. That's my responsive reaction. It's slower. It involves your head with your heart. So let's talk about the common form of giving is called charity, compassion, or that's what I've labeled it because I need to be able to speak it to my churches. This is what I take to my churches and my volunteers. This is what I'm doing here in my community, and it's transforming our affiliate. Charity compassion is the most comical. Charity compassion is the most common. I'm being comical, but it's not comical. It meets genuine needs: food, clothing, shelter. It's important. We will always do Charity Compassion Love Inc. We will always be about meeting real felt needs. It's biblical. Matthew 25:40, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Charity compassion can be done individually. Anyone here ever donated to a clothing or a food bank or something, taken something? All by yourself, no one else, you just did it? Everybody here has done that? We've all done that. Always with charity compassion, the giver and the recipient feel some temporary satisfaction. There's a feel-good feeling. But there's some real downsides to charity compassion done all by itself. Do not ever hear me say that charity compassion is not good. It's critical. You will always do charity compassion. You just can't only do charity compassion. And some of you affiliates that are open right now, as I talk about these, I want you to ask yourself, are we doing both or are we just doing charity compassion? Charity compassion is usually reactive. They ask for something, you meet it. So what are you focused on? You're focused on the need, not the person. It usually creates a dependency. It usually fosters distrust between those who have and those who need. Doesn't build positive emotions. It creates negative emotions. The giver has a power. The recipient remains dependent upon the giver and the heart of the giver and the resources of the giver. Normally, charity compassion is not sustainable by the giver for long, long periods of time. Because the situation doesn't change, the recipient has to ask over and over again in order to live in their need situation, because nothing's changing. They have to keep asking, right? It doesn't address their root issues. It's a handout. It meets their physical need, but it's not relational. It can be totally unrelational, right? You could give them something and never see them. It allows the giver to do something, but to remain uninvolved and unattached. It's why it's so common. We don't really all have time to enter into a relationship with somebody, so we'll do charity compassion. The motive of the giver at times can be self-serving, not sacrificial. I'll do something. And I have felt this way. Well, I'll give some money. Money's easy. To my church, I'll give money. I don't have time to teach a class. So I want to talk to you about developmental compassion, because I believe developmental compassion is pretty rare. I believe it's our defining difference. It is always married to charity compassion. You cannot do developmental compassion without charity compassion, but we are doing charity compassion without developmental compassion, okay? It's much less common. The critical component in developmental compassion, if you're wanting to know what makes the big difference, the recipient is always involved along with the giver in developmental compassion. The recipient has a role to play also. It's biblical. Leviticus 19:9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien, for I am the Lord your God. Now, if God had wanted us to do just charity compassion, wouldn't he have said, when you harvest, take a percentage and give to the poor and the alien? Take it to him, give it to him. He didn't say that. He said, call them to come and let them be a part of feeding themselves. Developmental compassion is always responsive. It's not reactive. It's thoughtful. It's driven by facts. It slows down. It gets involved. And the big kicker here is it knows that God is involved in that life. People, I'll give you a little secret. When someone calls you in need, you're not God's only resource, and you're not the last hope for that person. God is God, you're not. So if you don't meet the need, or they turn away, or they get angry because they don't want to do the loving process, God has promised to meet need. You're not His only resource. Don't put yourself up there. Every person who calls you is calling you, and you're given an opportunity by your Father in heaven to engage in their life. In some way or another, your responsibility is to discern what that way is. It might be to say, no, I can't give you that because you need to do this. I am trying to free you up to understand you do not just reactively meet the need that is asked for. It's not Christian. And it's our difference. Developmental compassion requires a participation of both parties. It's definitely a hand up. It empowers the recipient. It engages them. There's nobody that's disengaged here. You know that making someone call the clearinghouse and do an intake is developmental compassion because they have to be willing to tell you their story. So when they don't want to tell you their story, when they don't want to do the process, do we change it? Not if we're going to do developmental compassion. We've got to engage them in it. Telling the story is how you very first do developmental compassion. It starts at the clearinghouse level. Developmental compassion increases community. It's not done individually. It always requires a community, a networking of people together. You know, in community, people thrive, not just survive. Developmental compassion starts to restore dignity, and it starts to grow positive behaviors. Why? Because they're engaged. Developmental compassion always has clear boundaries and clear expectations, not just for the recipient, but for the giver. Everyone operates in a known avenue. What the giver is going to do, what the recipient's going to do, everybody knows. There's expectations and there's boundaries. It's not this feel-good, emotional, reactive giving. Developmental compassion does not try to relieve the pain because we learn most in our difficulties. We're not to save them, we're to serve them and walk with them. Developmental compassion is extremely difficult to administer. Ask me. I'm very focused on developmental compassion. It is not easily done. It is why it is so seldom done, and it must become what you do. You must be about this defining difference of engaging the church in developmental compassion along with charity compassion, which meets their felt need while you involve them in their need situation, and together there starts to become a change in their situation. So what have we learned over the last few years? One of the greatest needs, I believe, in our society today is positive role models and mentors. I believe children are growing up with certain basic skills absent from their home, and so they grow up and become adults with that same skill set. I'm talking about parenting, I'm talking about holding down jobs, I'm talking about very basic things, even cooking in their homes. Generational poverty is raising generations of people who have a different mindset than those of us who are fortunate to have the role model, like I did, of a father who went to work whether he felt good or not, who went to work every day, who was a faithful employee, who never left a job undone, who knew what it meant to be a good employee, who worked with other employees that didn't get along. He still went to work. It wasn't a choice. You don't like every day of work. That was what I learned. You work and you work hard and you're a good employee. That was my role model. But what if a child never sees that? Do they naturally, instinctively know how to become a good employee when they become an adult? No. So who can become the role models and mentors? We can. The church can. Children are modeling their parents' lifestyles. Noise and activity is replacing relationships. We live in a noisy world and busy. Instant gratification is rampant. I think for all of us, people who call us want their need immediately. Of course they're in a crisis. They're always in a crisis that has been developing for years. But we want instant gratification. Everything about us is faster, quicker. I want it now. That's not just people in need. We live there too. You're probably all so antsy because you can't answer your cell phones right now. You're not available right now. Parents have lost the art of parenting. Why? Because they weren't parented. And what's happening is those children grow into adults who've never had boundaries or expectations or felt what happens when they, work outside the boundaries. They've never been disciplined. And now they're adults. They don't respond to boundaries and discipline and expectations as adults if they never experienced it as a child. People's self-esteem is diminishing as they become less and less involved and they become more and more dependent, and this cycle is going on. They don't look at themselves as having potential to be different or to make a difference. They look at what you can do for them and they expect it. They don't know that they could be part of the answer because no one's told them. How often do we talk about they should live different, but we don't go over and walk with them? Really, I have to look at my own life. I've looked at people with their food stamps and their carts piled up with their steak and their ice cream and all the stuff that they buy, and I think they need to shop different. But we need to help them learn how to shop different. They don't just instinctively know that. I think people have given up hope. They feel trapped. They're not trying anymore. They're not struggling. Not in generational poverty. They're not struggling. So the best way we're going to address this is what? To change from looking at the need to start looking at the person. We're going to start with the person. We're going to help them see their potential through God's eyes. We're going to see their potential through God's eyes, and we're going to become willing to invest in them, willing to say no to them, starting to understand what is happening when we do what we do with them. I know volunteers will rally and come around this type of help. Volunteers want to make a difference, and they do not want to be continually just feeding with no change. That's not exciting to them. I know that volunteers in our churches know how to shop, know how to cook, know how to work, know how to parent. They have the skills that are lacking in a lot of homes. They're willing to offer those simple skills to others and to mentor and to do it in very loving and non-judgmental or critical ways. I know that most people that have lived generationally in need are not jumping at the chance to change. This is our biggest dilemma here. We're offering 6 different relational programs now, and we're struggling to get clients who want to attend. Why are we struggling in getting people to come? Because they're not munching at their bit to change. Because why? Because they're living just fine right there in their eyes. So our huge challenge is to continue to speak this message so the resources become less and less until they're somewhat forced to come into what we offer them. transformation happens one person at a time. But with each person, they have a sphere they influence. And just like those families I just did the thing on the interviews, their children's lives are changed. Their children's future is changed. That's where we want to get to. So here's the emotions of what happens when developmental compassion and charity compassion become married together. And I want you to listen as I read these. Hopeless becomes hopeful that things can be better. Worthless starts to know they're worthy. The embarrassed becomes willing to share their story with others. Insignificant knows they're extremely significant to God and to others. Unimportant starts to feel important. The powerless begin to feel empowered. Incompetent starts to understand they have capabilities. Dependent starts to take baby steps to independence. The defeated experiences success, one small step at a time. Helpless starts to gain some control. Angry starts to find some contentment and hope. The entitlement begins to understand they have their own responsibility in this. Rejected feels embraced. The unloved knows they're highly loved and valued by God, and they experience it through us. We love them. Humiliated begins to have something to take pride in. Imprisoned starts to feel free, and the lost begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel. As they begin to believe in themselves and see themselves in the image of their Creator, transformation will take place. And as this transformation starts to take place in them, it will impact those around them, and they will become the role model to those who live in their sphere of people. And as they move from being the problem or part of the problem to being part of the solution, they begin to contribute to their society and to everyone that's around them as they understand the fullness that God has gifted them with. God did not create anyone that does not have. Every one of God's creation has great potential and worth. And we have to help them find that. So application 2 is when you turn to someone and you share with them some of the stuff that I have talked about. So I want you very quickly at your tables to just turn 2 or 3 of you together to visit through this. You're going to do this for 5 minutes, and then we're going to take our 15-minute break, and then we're going to come back together again. So, go! I brought in a scattering of our churches last year, and we had a powerhouse of what's working and what's not working, and what are you struggling with? And so then we came up with this Defining Difference seminar training that we're doing with them to help address some of the things we heard. They were saying they don't know what to say or do for sure. They know they could give the card, but they felt really disconnected with handing a card and not hearing back and not knowing if they called and all of that. They didn't know if the person called. They didn't know if they got help. They thought they were biblically supposed to respond to the need. They were unsure of the advantages of Love Inc. If they sent them to Love Inc. Why should they send them to Love Inc.? They had all these questions. So we came up with a whole process. You're not going to get that today, but you are going to get a little bit of information that you could at least take back and start on the process down. But there is not time this morning to do that whole training piece that I do with them. But we tried to address all of those concerns and help the church partner up with us better, and it's just been absolutely amazing. What has happened is we've started to go out and speak to them. One of the challenges that I think all Love Inc. affiliates struggle with is helping the church understand the value of Love Inc. You need to understand the value you bring to your community and why you are valuable to the church, because I am sure you've all heard from your churches, they don't need one more thing to do. They don't need a parachurch thing to support out here. They've already got hundreds of parachurch things there trying to pick and choose what they're supporting. So you have to be able to verbally communicate to them how you are a tool and a resource for them to use, not something they support. And they have to see the benefits of using that tool. So one of the things I actually say to them is, like any tool in a tool case, if it's never taken out, it doesn't seem to be very valuable. And Love Inc. will only be as valuable to its church partners as that church chooses to engage and use the tool of Love Inc. But you are a tool to help them mobilize their people to meet legitimate need in their community. So one of the values you bring is we can do together what we cannot do apart. That value of unifying the church, the Christian church, because it can do so much more together than it can do singly, all scattered around the valley. And then you coordinate all the resources, the expertise, the talents within all those churches, and that's a great value that you bring to the church. The value you bring of being able to empower and mobilize their church members. Churches are filled with people who want to serve. And churches have basic service opportunities, but when the plumber walks up and says, I want to fix the toilet this afternoon, do you have one? Or somebody walks up and says, I want to give a ride. Do you have someone that needs a ride? Churches can struggle with mobilizing the people who want to serve. So that's a value you bring to them. And how you manage your volunteers is critical. Norma is going to do a whole piece on managing your volunteers, but that is who we are. We are simply the church mobilized. So how you work with your volunteers, it should be critical in your Love Inc. affiliate. Identifying their true passions, their giftings, placing them, training them, nurturing them, using them appropriately. That's what we do for the church. That's all done through a talent tithe process that I will offer some training on later, but empowering hundreds of people to use their legitimate gifts and services in service for the King. Another value that you're going to bring to the church is this central clearinghouse, this telephone call center, and I go in great depth about it should be a call center and not a walk-in center, because there's great value in being a telephone call center. So the value that you're going to bring to the church in being a place where people in need can call and place their need, and this is a huge value you bring. You need to be able to speak into it. I've just told you that you need to look at the person and not the need. The church hardly has time to hear the need, much less hear their 2.5, 3-hour story. You have a process set up to bring that value to them, to allow them to focus on the person, because you have people in place that have time to hear their story and focus on them. And that ability to assess the need through that process, that's of great value to the churches. They're struggling doing that at their church front. The value you bring to the church in guaranteeing them, and when you tell them you're going to do this, then you better do it. Know all the resources in your community to the very best of your ability. All your agency, other nonprofits, other serving entities, and church ministries. Know everything that's out there so that you can tell them, send us anyone in need, and we'll know if someone's doing something well, and we can send them to them. We don't duplicate what's out there. We raise up to meet the gaps. So that value of knowing what's in the community and being an on-the-spot resource for the church. Don't print them lists of what's in the community and send it to them to have to look through and sift through when somebody's in need. You bring that value to them by them just calling, having the person call a number, and you're going to offer that out to them. The value that you bring to a church and being able to coordinate all kinds of product Now, tomorrow, when you tour our facility site, you're going to see a process we have in working in our space to coordinate a lot of different product. But I have asked my staff to be sure and tell you that when we were new, that we couldn't manage a lot of product. You don't start where you grow to. So for you new affiliates, don't first set your sights on offering the value of anything you want to donate, we'll take. It will just bury you literally. Because we had a little 300 square foot office before we had any more other spaces and Gap Ministries going. All that product came in and sat around my desk. It was horrible because I'm a little bit of a fiend on cleanliness and clutter. And there it all sat, and I'd trip over it every time I'd stand up, and people would bring it, and I thought I couldn't tell them that we weren't far enough along to receive it. I thought that would discourage them. But I learned that it was better to have them drop it somewhere else that could manage it than to have them drop it at my desk and I couldn't manage it. So when you're initially starting out, you've got to be wise. But as you grow, you will be able to have people donate into you vast amounts of almost anything, and you'll be able to process it. Sending it into your Gap Ministries, sending it into possible resale shops as you get larger and have other ministries going. A resale shop only needs to come into your ministry when you have a lot of programs already in place and growing, and it helps to diversify your funding base. A resale shop is not something you bring in early on. So you need to not be focused there unless you've really got a lot of other ministry that's very, very healthy. But also product can come in and you can send it on to all the other helping entities that may use that product that you don't use. So you kind of become this local pool for product to come into and to be dispersed. And once you get the space and the volunteers, it opens up hundreds of volunteer opportunities. People running the product, people cleaning the product, people picking the product up, people fixing the product. It just opens up opportunities unbelievable. And that's a value because a church cannot have beds on hand and blankets on hand and clothing on hand. Every church cannot have that on hand for the person who calls it needs it. But Love Inc., as it grows, can bring that value to the church. So for a new one, you would talk about a value you will bring as you grow. And initially, you'll probably identify one particular thing you'll collect, whether it be diapers, blankets, something that you can manage and collect, and that may be where you start. Not everything. Don't do like me and just literally be buried at your desk with stuff that you don't know what to do with and you're afraid to tell them that you're not really there yet to receive it. No one got discouraged with us honestly sharing that we weren't ready at that point to receive particular things. And some things like clothing literally will bury you in an afternoon if you open the floodgate. It just comes in droves, in bags, in hundreds of thousands, and pretty soon you can't breathe. A value that you're going to bring is coordinating all this product and all these services to offer out to people free. Huge value. A value you're going to bring down the road will be your life-changing programs that you'll put in place with accountability, with incentives, long-term, with mentors, with all of the stuff I've talked about. When you speak to your churches, you speak value of where you are and you speak value of where you could become if they could engage and fully support you. Don't try to do it all. You can speak of the potential without attempting to do it and failing. You can speak into it, but you do need to understand your value. I think what the Unified Church can do, no one else can do. No one else has the amount of resources that lie within our church as far as skills and expertise and hand labor and product. The church is so totally complete. God's people are so gifted. You need to be able to verbalize this value to the church is a very critical page for you to start speaking into your church. Don't just tell them, send us your people to call. When someone walks in, send them to us to call and we'll find out if they're legitimate. Start telling them all the ways you're valuable to that church, and they'll want to partner with you. So let's get to the heart of the matter. We're going to talk for a little bit about the con artists and people that live in chronic need and take advantage of the system. I am in no way lumping everybody that calls us in this category, but there's a pretty high number of people in this category, and they tend to overshadow some of the other people. So we're going to spend some time, because I think you need to understand it, and I also think you need to tell your church. Everything that I share this morning, this defining difference, this needs to go back to your church, to your board, to your volunteers. This is not about the inner workings of how to do something. This is about who we are and why we do what we do. This is about our defining differences. This piece in its entirety is what you take back to your community to help them understand what you are, who you are, why you do what you do. This will help you do your ministry. So first of all, we need to understand people are always in a crisis when they call, but their crisis did not just happen. They're always in a crisis. Our response is important. First of all, Love Inc. You can't be a crisis center. If you are one right now, if you're an operating affiliate and you're trying to respond to crisis calls, you're going to need to go back and change that. How can you mobilize the church and how can you focus on the person if you're going to meet their crisis? Because you're never going to get a need that isn't a crisis. They don't call you when they think they might have kind of a need. They call you when they're in crisis. So crisis doesn't work for Love Inc. You need to know the community's crisis numbers. You need to know the process for people that are truly in crisis. You need to understand that while their situation developed over time and now they are in crisis, you can engage in both charity and developmental compassion to start to address it, but it's going to be a process. There is nothing gained by jumping into the fire with them and both of you burning up. You don't accomplish anything. It's just like if you don't swim and somebody falls out of the boat and they're drowning and you jump into the water without a life jacket on yourself, you're not going to save them and you're going to drown too. So if it's truly a crisis, if they're on the line, they're going to commit suicide, they're being beat up, they're whatever, they need to call 911. They need to call the crisis numbers. You're not a resource for them at that point anyway. You need to hear their story. You need to do some assessment and talk to people about their story. We spend all day tomorrow talking about how important it is to spend time with them in their situation. So the person's more important than their expressed need. That meeting the need and ignoring the person. It should not happen in Love Inc. And you're the only one that can stop it from happening. You're in total control here. What happens when you hear their story? When you take the time to hear the story in the process, you better understand what brought them to this crisis. You identify additional needs that you can bring the church in to impact their situation. Always, when we take time to hear the story, you hear more than just their expressed need. And tomorrow I'll tell a little story relative to that, but it's just critical that you hear their story. And in that story and in that assessment process, you're going to discern and clarify how to best start working with them. That's why you have the process. Uneducated crisis giving just compounds a problem. It keeps them from being part of the solution. It prevents them from needing to make a better choice. So it allows them to live in a destructive lifestyle, and it just may interfere with what God's doing. So let's talk about this professional con artist. They take advantage of people because they can. And they're really, really, really good at it. When I have a pastor tell me, when they come in, I can tell who's authentic and who's not, I always smile. Because I can't. The ones who are most believable are usually the cons. They don't tell stories you couldn't buy. They got it down. Usually the ones we really go, oh, can this really be? They're the authentic ones. They don't know that their story's so far out there, you're not even going to buy it. It's so far gone. But the con artists, they know it. They know that they need to bring children because we can't say no to children. So they borrow children. They dirty children up. They always have children. So when we respond to children, often it's a ploy. To the professional, it's always a ploy. In fact, that's why they have so many children. And I don't know about your community, but one of my really pet peeves is a lot of people who live in generational need, that have a lot of need in their home, they can have a lot of children that all get disability for learning disabilities and things, and they have children because that's their income. And I don't know quite how to address that yet, but I find that really, really sad that the ADD and ADHD and all of those things give mom the check. And they don't actually want those kids to do better, because if they got better, they might lose that money. So children are used to help them live a lifestyle. They know when to request, and it's always at the most inopportune time. Yes, it's on Friday afternoon when you're hoping to close down for the weekend. Yes, it's on Sunday morning when the pastor's trying to get ready to go out to the pulpit at church, or right after church when the pastor's at the door with half of his parishioners around him. They know that. They know the answer will be different if they've got an audience. They know who gives and they know who to target. It gets out. You don't believe me? Pay one bill. And then tell the next 150 calls that come the next day why you chose to pay Sally's bill and no one else's. Because that's what you'll get. Just pay one bill. They tell each other. And then they're going to say, but you paid Sally's. How come you're not going to pay mine? They make poor choices because they can. They know someone's going to feel sorry for them and someone's going to help them. And they place very little value on what they've been given. They're not involved with it. They had nothing to do with it. They'll ask and get more from someone else. They leave it when they move. They abuse it. They use it up. They often sell what they get. They pick through, they keep what they want. In our early days, we took a couch out. We did the whole process as well as we could. Our furniture team delivered the couch to the home that had 7 other couches. I think they were looking for a particular color. We were one of many. You learn. You learn from these things. So let's look at some common problems of the con artist. First, you're their budget. Understand that. We hear this more on our clearinghouse lines than we would like to. Get a job. I can't get a job. I have no time to get a job. Do you know it takes me 3 days a week to call around to get my bills paid? How could I work? That's their job. You're their budget. And they're not ashamed of it. They'll tell you. Vacations and trips. They probably take better trips and vacations than you do because they can. Because they can go from city to city to city, and someone will put gas in their tank and someone will put them up. Because we don't know what to do with in-transit people that just show up passing through, do we? So we give them a little gas, and sometimes we give them a room, and we help them have a wonderful vacation. They do. They travel around the world. They don't have to work, and we fund their vacation. Utility bills. I'm going to speak from an Idaho perspective here, but I suggest you find out what's common in your community. But Idaho has 4 seasons. We have found very, very common with the abuser. They pay their power bill in the coldest months. So they'll pay it November, December, January, sometimes February. But as we start to move into spring, they quit paying it because it takes them a couple months for the power company to turn off. By the time they turn off, we've become seasonal and they can survive outside. So they live outside through the summer because they can. And then come fall, They run to those of us who are helping and to our churches, and they present these huge power bills that have to be paid in their entirety to get turned on, and they bring their children, and we all look at them and their children, and we know it's going to be below freezing all winter, and we all gather up the money and we turn the power back on. And this is the utility plan for them. You know how you can pay your utility bill on a level pay? That's their level pay. Food. They don't always use their food stamps wisely, and I don't want to put everybody, I'm not putting everybody in any of these categories. Don't get me that, but you need to understand. A lot of people don't spend their food stamps wisely because they don't have to. And if you have the choice, yesterday Fred Meyer's ad said steak and lobster. If I had my druthers between a hot dog and steak and lobster, I'd take the steak and lobster. They can spend their food stamps on expensive things because around here there's enough food banks. They'll always get food at the end of the month. Always. So they buy what they want, and they run out, they go to the food banks. It's their plan. And right now, our food banks, a high percentage of them, and we have tons of food banks. You'll see a food pantry at our facility. It's for the people in our relational programs. We feed them every meal if they're enrolled. But the people that are using the food banks, a huge majority of our food banks require nothing. They just have to come, and they get food. That allows them to pick through the food and actually take what they want and leave the rest or pass it on or whatever. Eviction, I don't know. See, I don't live in another state. I've always lived in Idaho. I love Idaho. But in Idaho, our landlords are absolutely amazing. They let people stay in their homes for months and months and months and months and not pay their rent or pay a dribble here or a dribble there before they actually do the eviction. So when they show up to us with a call, and they're calling us and they're crying because their stuff's on the street and they're going to be on the street tonight and they have nowhere to go, and we only get those calls on Friday afternoon, headed into the weekend. Not really, but anyway, we know that with almost all our landlords, they've known it's coming for anywhere from 5 to 8 months. Yes, they're in crisis when they call us, but they lived a long time knowing that day was coming. What do we teach them if we put them up in the hotel that they so desperately want over the weekend? We also follow up with the people who call Friday afternoon crying, wondering how the church could put them out and not put them up. We call them back on Monday. They all had somewhere to go. They just didn't want to go there. They wanted the motel room. We've never had one of them tell us they actually were on the street for the weekend. And we do call them back. Funerals. This is a toughie. When they have a funeral, they need the money to go to the funeral. We have a lot of people with relatives in Florida and Idaho. A lot of people. I think half of our relatives live in Florida. And the important thing is, often it is a relative in Florida that died. But if you do further research than just did they pass away in Florida, we find out that the person asking Bob hadn't been in touch with Henry for 30 years, but when Henry died, Bob had to go to the funeral. You need to get into it to find out. It's a great vacation. Do you know that vehicles, if you put gas in a tank of a car that does not have registration, does not have a current license plate, is not registered, that you have illegally put the car on the road? You can't just put gas tank in a car unless you know all this stuff. The con artists are good. So how can we help our churches talk to people when they show up at their face and they're sitting there? How can we help our churches believe in what Love Inc. does so that they will feel good about using Love Inc.? I think it's important to share your heart with them and share how much we believe God values them so that they first start to look at them differently. They're not afraid of them. And that we talk to them about speaking honestly and with love and speaking truth and not letting them manipulate them, but believing that we want to help the greater need, which is why they need to do the Love Inc. process. Church cannot do the Love Inc. process with everyone who asks for need. So we try to help our churches not speak of Love Inc. as something over there, parachurch. So we try to give them language of, I can't help you right here, but we can help you. Our church meets need. It's in another office. Our volunteers serve there. It's through the Ministry of Love in the Name of Christ. And you need to call there. But that's where our church meets need. Do you see how it's first person? It's not saying, I'm sorry, we can't help you. Here's a card. Love Inc. can help you. That makes Love Inc. something else. And who is Love Inc.? Love Inc.'s that church and every other church. So give them first person language. I think that's really, really important. Then you need to have them talk about, our volunteers work over there, and our volunteers are trained, and they have the time. Our church wants to hear your story. I don't have the time, but we have volunteers over there who have the time. You need to call that number. The church didn't pass it off. The church just spoke of it differently. They can also say, you know, our church partners with a lot of other churches, and we pool our resources together. I don't have any of those resources right here. But if you call Love Inc., they have banks and warehouses where they have stuff to help people in need when they have done the process and when they found out that it's the best way to help them. So while I don't have it right here, our church does have the resources. It's always our church does have, our church does do, our church will help. See the difference? Give them those words. They shouldn't pass it off because Love Inc. is just them. They just need to say it different. Now you also need to help them because almost everyone who's a user or has called or doesn't want to do the process is balking at the process or hasn't liked that you suggested something else they need to do before you do this, that developmental married with charity, critical. They'll say, I called Love Inc., they won't help me. Every partner church struggles with this. So we got to equip our church. What do they say when they say that? First, I ask them to find out when did they call you and what exactly did Love Inc. say. And then I tell all of our churches, I train all of our churches, if we're open, and our open hours are 8 to 5, if we're open, call us right then, right while they're there. Or put them on hold and call us right then and say, I would like to know status of the file on this person. They said you won't help them. If they're in person, they'll run out the door or change their story. And or hang up if you've put them on hold. If they're lying, they're not going to stick around for you to find out that when you told them you needed to hear their story and you needed them to ask a few questions or you needed permission to do some verification that they hung up on you. All they're going to tell you is Love Inc. wouldn't help them. So give your church, empower them to call you on every single person who tells them that story. The clients are going to say, but I need help right now. You got to do this whole thing about we're not crisis. Every situation developed over time. You've got to empower your churches with this. You've got to educate them. I don't have anywhere to go if you don't help me. And normally they're in person with the church. So they're crying right there. Secretary's pretty befuddled with the whole thing. Empower your secretary or your church people to understand what little thing they're going to do right now is not going to impact their life for the greater change. They're going to stay in need with whatever they could do on that moment at that very spot. And I try to help my churches by saying, I care too much about you to just do something and know that it won't really make a difference. We have members of our church that work over here with Love in the Name of Christ and a lot of other volunteers. We're ready to engage with you for a long time. I won't do something so you just leave right now. You need to empower them and speak those words into them and write them down and help them learn how to say that. How can you call yourself a Christian? You're not a Christian. I thought Christians help people. I mean, really, the people who are cons will really spout off the Christian thing in Scripture and the whole thing. God never said, if you're a Christian, you get anybody and everybody exactly what they want and you never ask any questions. It's not Christian. Tell him that. My God doesn't want me to help you in a way that's actually going to hurt you. And I'm accountable to my God And I have to be responsive in how I help you. Empower them. I'm not going to just give you something so you leave. I've got to do the right thing. And the right thing will be to have you tell your story where our volunteers work. Empower them. And then I'm going to talk to you about your church writing a policy. I'm sorry, but our church's policy is, and you have to do this before our church can engage in any way in your need situation. Get it in your church's policies. Most churches in my community, I've been amazed. I've been doing this training now for 6-7 months. Most of our churches had no policies. When I get done training, they're writing policies on how to address walk-ins, on how to address the church members, and they're writing Love Inc. into the policies. So now they can say, our church policy is. You have to call over here where our volunteers work, and you have to be willing to tell their story, and they're going to call back and talk to us. But it's in our policy. There is nothing I can do right here. That's our policy. You want to get it in their policy. When they threaten you, they're going to tell everybody. Tell them, I can't stop you from saying what you want, but I will not give in to that. You have offered them something. Empower the church to be able to stand firm and say, you have offered him something. Now, all of this is language for the church, not for Love Inc. specifically. This is helping your churches because they've got them coming right to them, helping them know why it's so important to connect them over to Love Inc. Then also tell them what they shouldn't do. They should never promise them anything. How many of you open affiliates have had a church say, just call Love Inc., they'll pay your bill? They just want them gone, so they offer them stuff. And then you have to talk back down the stuff when they call. So tell your church, don't promise them anything. Just promise them that you'll work on their situation and see what ways you can help them. Tell your church not to give in to them. If they refuse to do the process, that's their choice. But don't say, oh, okay, well, if you don't want to call them, I guess I could at least give you $15 gas. Or I could at least take you down and buy you dinner. Tell your church, don't give in. Because what do they do? This is where you got to, again, empower your churches. What do you teach them when you get talked down and give them their way? Aren't they just like a child who throws a tantrum and then gets their way? What do you teach them? Is that what God wants us to do? So we need to help them. Tell your churches, I don't think many would do this, but to call the church back if Love Inc. doesn't help them. Tell them they shouldn't do that. Tell the church not to give them cash, not to get along with them, not to drive them somewhere alone, to do things in pairs if they have to do something, to never give out personal information, addresses, phone numbers, and to never, 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 never be the only person in the church alone with a walk-in off the street. It's not smart. It's not smart in your office. There needs to be another plan. Okay, so let's talk about policies and procedures for addressing need situations. Like I said, most churches do not have defined policies in place on how they're going to respond. Most churches are shooting from the hip. That's walk in and it's whoever meets them and it's how they feel at the moment, and depending upon which person it is. And I talk to my churches about this too. We're all wired differently. As you all can tell, you probably wouldn't want to be a con artist coming up to me. Right? I'm just kind of wired that way. I'm going to speak a lot of truth into you. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but I can't ever pretend or not be what I am or say what I am. I'm incapable of that. So that's how I'm wired. So I'm pretty good to work with people who want to manipulate me because I'm not manipulatable. Is that a real word? A lot of churches have people, secretaries, others in their church. God has wired them, and they're very, very compassionate, sympathetic people who must do something. They're just wired that way. They have to do something. If that's who the walk-in's going to approach, they're never going to get them steered to Love Inc. because they're not wired that way. So the church needs to have whoever addresses the walk-in to be a person more wired like me. That doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate. But I am just different. I don't have to do anything, probably because I had a dream. But I don't have to do anything. I'm much more afraid of my God than I am anything else. So I don't have to do anything. I want to please Him. But there's nothing wrong with that person who is very, very somebody who just needs to do something. That's how they're wired. Just don't make them the first stop. Put them somewhere where they're at the end and they are giving out. When the process has been done and the people are showing up and they're getting served, that's where you put that person, because that's where they're wired. So help the church make sure whoever walks in to address the walk-in, whoever's there to address the walk-in, is wired appropriately. Otherwise, they're asking somebody to do something that doesn't work for them. I think that's important. That needs to be part of their policy. But I was amazed to find out that my big churches didn't have policies. It really was, how did they feel? Or they were sending them to one person who was trying to kind of feel their way through to figure out what to do. And yes, they were sending them to Loving, but they were also trying to do something on their end. They weren't sure what Loving was doing, all of that stuff. So I have the churches ask two very important questions first. How is it meeting need right now? And does it need to change? Is it working? So ask your churches that. What do you do right now with the people who walk in or the church members who ask, and is it working? After you find out those two things, then you can speak into how about you create procedures and policies to make it more effective. So what is a procedure? A procedure defines how the policy is implemented. And I have actually found I have to teach the churches this, procedures and policies. They don't naturally know it. Don't just say, well, you need to create a policy and put Loving in it. Help them create a policy, okay? Teach them. So procedures are who's going to administer it, how, if it's going to give out a resource, how they're going to collect it, maintain it, what kind of reporting, how they're going to change the policy if they need to. Procedures all about the how-to. And then policy is all about the what. What's being done. So they write a policy then. So who covers it? Who does it cover, I mean? Is it walk-in? Is it church member? Is it friended church member? Is it all three? Is there 3 policies? What does the church need? I always suggest they need at least 3 policies. They shouldn't treat a church member like they treat walking off the street. So they can't have one policy to cover it all. How are they going to receive the request? In person, in written form, verbally over the phone? How do they take requests for needs? Their church. Requirements. Will it require that they submit an application to Loving? Does it require that they allow Loving to hear the story? That's a recommended option. Will they have to show proof of need if it's for like a money or something? Will they have to attend some classes or participate in something? Will they have to go to something to reap something? What is that? That's developmental compassion, not unloving. And then how often? How often will they give? One time, multiple times, up to a certain limit? All of that's in the policy. So let's take a look at a sample policy for Abundant Joy Church. Abundant Joy Church will form a benevolence board of their church deacons, and then one deacon from that benevolence board will administer their financial policy. So Abundant Joy Church has written a financial policy. The benevolence fund for that financial policy will be established and maintained by an offering taking on the 3rd Sunday and other contributions. So see it showing them how to keep the funds, the money. The lead deacon can't spend more money than is in the fund. Needs to be in there. The appointed deacon, the lead deacon, will submit a report back to the full benevolence board on all activity. And it can only be changed by universal vote. So let's take a look at their policy. First, their financial policy, the recipient has to be an attending member of that church. So can a walk-in get financial help from this church? No. It's in the policy. They cannot have received financial assistance within the last 6 months or up to $3,000 total. So there's caps on it. They have to present the request to the deacon verbally, and they have to bring with them the bill that they're wanting help with. to the deacon. So now you know how the request will be made. The recipient has to do the application process with Love Inc. and allow the deacon to talk to Love Inc. before they will distribute any money. Love Inc. got written into this policy. When they have deemed it appropriate, the deacon will pay the owed party 50% of the bill, or $200 individual maximum, once they've done these other things. Okay, and then say that the church, they tried to write a policy for the crisis. So say the recipient is a one-time crisis need, the 6 months isn't up. They can submit a written application to the board, and the full board will read it, and they have to be willing to have a verbal review with the board, and then a unanimous 100% vote of the board could give that person money again before the 6-month period. So they could make exceptions. This is a financial policy for Abundant Joy Church. Love Inc. Senate. Help your churches write some policies. So we are now in our last breakout application. I'm going to give you about another 5 minutes. Turn to someone you didn't talk to last time and look at page 30 and go over some of these questions again. So turn to someone else and do your application 3. We have spent this morning talking about the heart of Love Inc., the why of Love Inc., the why do we do what we do and how do we do what we do. And, we looked at our mission statement, the core values, the affiliate breakdowns, and then we started looking into people in need, poverty, emotions. The emotions of people living in need and how our responses affect them are critical. The charity compassion, developmental compassion, I hope you understand their clear differences, but how they cannot be done alone, either one. You could never do developmental compassion and withhold charity compassion. They're always married. But there is a lot of charity compassion being done without any developmental compassion. And then we talked about our churches. What are they struggling with? How do we help them communicate to people that come to them with requests? How do we help them understand our value? Do you understand our value better? How do we help them? If you can't speak the value, you'll never explain it to them. I suggest it's something you practice, so that you could click off the 5 or 6 value pieces in one sentence, very short things to anybody that would ask you. When they say, our church is so busy, we don't have time to support Love Inc., say, oh, you don't support us. We're a tool that you would use. And let me just, do you have 5 minutes? I want to tell you the value we would bring if you would use this tool. And then click them off in 5 minutes. But, it's something you have to learn. It's something you have to get. So it's just second nature. Then we have to help our churches have language. It's not, oh, we're not going to help you. You need to go to Love Inc. They help you. Isn't that what your churches are saying right now, for those of you that are open? Isn't that what they're saying? So you need to change that. It's, I can't help you right here, but our church is equipped to help you. Your church is equipped to help you. And then finally, we talked about policies and procedures and the importance of churches being responsive in how they address need and not reactive, and the importance of us working with them and hopefully getting written into their policy, where they actually, part of their policy is, it becomes secondhand to say, our policy is, and part of that is that you allow Love Inc. to hear your story and to do some information gathering and assessing. Once you're in the church's policy, your relationship is transformed with that church. And then how valuable do you become to them? You're in the church. You're in the policy. You're no longer thought of as a parachurch thing we draw an offering for once a month or once a year. You're now thought of part of their policy. So, what makes us different? Our love. our source of strength, our motives. Why should we say no? Sometimes it's appropriate. It needs to be what drives us. We shouldn't say no all the time, but sometimes giving's inappropriate at the level they want it. Our relationships, it's a defining difference. Our methods, definitely a defining difference. Why doesn't everyone do developmental compassion? Because it's hard. Why is the church the perfect entity to do it? Because we're different. Our objectives are different. Are you different? You open operating affiliates, or do you look like other helping entities in your community? Ask yourself. You need to not resemble everybody else. This is His work. At the heart of the movement of loving is the cross. It's in our logo. We are always driven by our love of Christ, by our desire to see the value that God has in each and every person who serves or is served, by investing through relationship in everyone that we work with or works with us. The cross. Christ. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that could move mountains, but I have not love, I gain nothing. I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and I surrender my own body to the flames, but I have not love, I gain nothing. 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. People, church, let's make a defining difference in our community. Let's see what the movement of love in the name of Christ can do.